Hey night travelers, tonight we're skipping the prim teacups and polite parlors to dig into the real Victorian pastime. Drugs. Forget the stiff upper lip and Queen Victoria's portraits. Daily life in the 19th century was fueled by opium, cocaine, and enough laudanum to drown an elephant. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1872. The good news: pharmacies are everywhere, and no one will judge you for popping in for a bottle of medicine. The bad news: that medicine is usually opium dissolved in alcohol, cocaine-laced wine, or heroin drops for your nerves. The first thing you notice is the bittersweet smell of laudanum and pipe smoke drifting through your lodging house. Your bedroom is a cramped boarding room above a gin shop, and you share the hallway with coughing clerks, exhausted factory workers, and at least one poet scribbling feverishly through the night thanks to a morphine habit. Breakfast isn't bacon and eggs, it's more likely weak tea, stale bread, and a few drops of tincture to keep the shakes at bay. The good news: everyone from dock workers to duchesses uses the same stuff, so you won't feel out of place. The bad news: dosages aren't measured, a teaspoon too much and you might never wake up. Doctors prescribe it, mothers feed it to crying babies, and writers brag about it fueling their genius. Addiction. Not even a recognized word yet. By the time you've sipped cocaine wine for energy, taken laudanum for your headache, and smoked a little opium to relax, you'll realize Victorian Britain was less tea and crumpets and more one giant, legally sanctioned drug binge. You come back to yourself as if someone has tilted the world and left you sloshing in it. Your mouth tastes of metal and camphor. The pillow under your cheek smells like yesterday's newspaper, and the faint, clinging sweetness of spirits. Light filters through grime, a weak yellow column that turns the dust motes into a slow, melancholy snowfall. The bed frame is a rickety skeleton of iron. The mattress sighs under you, exhaling the smell of old sweat and something medicinal that has soaked into the sheets. Your head is a drum, muffled where a hand presses it from inside. You blink and the room arranges itself in bitter relief. A cracked chamber pot squats under the washstand. A wooden crate shoved under the window holds the clothes you wore yesterday, stiff collar, a waistcoat that will never hang right again. On the mantel, a small glass phial catches the light. Inside is a brown, viscous liquid labeled in a neat, sloping hand: laudanum. Someone's written for the cough and crossed it out twice. Next to it, a chipped teacup holds the frozen dregs of what might have been gin, the surface crusted with sugar and cigarette ash. You inhale, the breath pulls through your chest like an old bellows. Smoke sits in the room in layers, tobacco from a pipe, a hint of cheap. Cigar and a deeper, sweeter tang that burrows at the back of your throat. That sweetness is opium's ghost. Someone here dosed themselves last night to blot out the world. The smell wraps around you like a shawl. You find it both comforting and corrosive, like the memory of a lover you ought to forget. Downstairs, life is a series of small violences. A door slams. The landlord's rasping voice tells someone to mind their coins. Footsteps, boots on wood, carry news of the morning papers and unpaid rent. Through the thin wall you catch fragments. A woman's laugh clipped and brittle, the scraped syllables of a child being told to eat. Every sound tastes faintly of industry and poverty, the two things that keep the country moving. You push the blanket away and sit up. The room tilts. A bead of sweat runs cold down your spine. There's a little brass measure on the shelf, half an inch of metal, a thing for measuring a dose. It's pitted and stained. No doctor in the house, only the chemist's handwriting on the bottle. There are no scales, no printed instructions, just the assumption that a teaspoonful means different things depending on who's pouring. Through the thin glass you see the street. A puddle of oil reflects the slow procession of carts and horse hooves. Men in caps bend over their work, and a woman in a shawl balances a basket on her hip. The air carries the rattle of a milk cart and the distant, brittle clatter of coal being unloaded. Someone below is coughing so hard the sound seems to have come from a different century. Consumption takes a neighbor every other winter, and still they keep breathing it in as if denial could thicken the lungs. You swing your feet to the floor and your ankle protests. A sting of last night's too much gin, or perhaps from the way you slept. On the washstand, a tin of snuff opens with a metallic sigh. A finger dips in, comes out dusted in coarse powder. A man across the hall will take a pinch in a moment, steam of tobacco and dust mingling in his nasal passages. He always says snuff keeps the head clear. His cheeks are hollow and he smells of iron. A cough bursts through the corridor like a gunshot. The poet you share the landing with is already awake at his desk, quill in hand, paper scattered like the wreckage of a ship. He writes with long, fevered strokes, hands jittering. He grins at you when you pass, a smile frayed as if stitched by someone with poor eyesight. Last night he declaimed to the room about genius and ruin, and offered you a draught of something warm he called Bristol Savor. You declined, but you watched him tilt his chin back and pour another spoonful into his mouth. By dawn he'd been scribbling in a daze, muttering lines that make less sense the more you try to remember them. You step into the corridor and smell something else, fresh bread. The landlady walks past balancing a tray, 2 boiled eggs, a hunk of bread, a jug of tea. Her apron is halved with flour, but her hands are quick and practiced. She stops by the nursery door and drops a teaspoon in a baby's mouth. The infant makes a small, satisfied face and folds sleep back over itself. You catch the spoon's glint. There is a dark liquid on it. The landlady's eyes meet yours for a second, and she shrugs as if to say you'd do the same. She is a small woman with a large appetite for security. The laudanum jar on her dresser is only one of the conveniences she keeps to keep the house tolerable and the bills paid. There is an argument next door like a short thunderstorm. A factory worker's wife tells him he must take on more shifts. He says he's already selling his boots. He lifts his hand to his face, and there's a red smear on his knuckle where it looks like someone has been bitten. Perhaps by hunger, perhaps by fate. He swears, not dramatically, but in the precise language of those who have had every choice eaten away from them. You find your coat draped over a chair, its inside pocket full of bills you do not have. In another pocket is a small, secreted bottle of Coca tonic, a fashionable thing, especially among men who must keep going. You remember paying a chemist this morning for the last bottle, a smiling assistant, white apron, and the gentle assurance that this will keep you bright as the noonday sun. The bottle's cork is still warm from your grasp last night. There is a luster to the glass that promises energy. Outside, men push and shove for the work that feeds them, and inside, remedies promise to make it bearable. You pad to the sink and splash cold water on your face. The water tastes faintly of iron, and the room behind it is an arrangement of urgency and squalor. A pattern begins to form. Everyone here has a bottle tucked away. Everyone has a hobby of drowning some ache. A cough, a folded letter. A child calmed into sleep by a doctor's prescribed sleep draft. Their rituals are small and precise. Measure, pour, tip, swallow. And this house runs on such routines as clockwork does on gears. Someone knocks loudly at your door. A voice calls your name, cheerful with the hard cheer of people who have no time for gentleness. You open and find a fellow lodger, his eyes bright and his cheeks flushed. He offers you a pipe and 2 coins for a cup of tea. He says the shipyard has work today if you can make it across the bridge. The promise sits in the air like steam. You take the pipe, the tobacco bitter in your mouth like a rebuke and a benediction in one. You stand there in your little kingdom of bargains and bandages, smelling tobacco and laudanum and the eternal tang of gin, and you realize the day will demand transaction and deception in equal measure. People will pour potions with the same hand they count their coins. You will, too, because at the end of the day, a warm draft and a soft stupor are as good a shelter as any roof. You reach for the little glass bottle before your boots are fully on. It sits on the washstand like a private sun, amber liquid caught in a stopped phial, the cork soft with handling. The label is printed in neat black script, laudanum tinct, opii, dosage, few drops. Your thumb finds the rim, the glass cool and a little tacky where someone else's fingers have left an oil smudge. The first thing you notice is the smell. Not only the alcohol, but the faintly floral, medicinal sweetness underneath, like rosewater gone bad and the sweaty back of a theater costume. It promises warmth and forgetting, a small legal oblivion that fits in your palm. You tip the bottle and a black beaded drop forms at the lip. It swings, catches the light, and falls. The taste is immediate, bitter first, then a sweet recoil like burnt sugar, then the burn of spirits. You swallow. The house keeps its usual noises. The coughs down the corridor, the clack of boots on timber, the landlord arguing with the lodger about a missing shilling. But they feel farther away, as if you're still wearing yesterday's coat. Your stomach loosens, your jaw unclenches. The room tilts the size of a stage, edging toward comfortable unreality. The laudanum works like a dimmer on the world. The edges round, small injuries and irritations shrink. Your hands stop shaking enough to button your shirt. Your chest, tight from worry and damp, finds a beat that isn't always racing. It is relief that smells of brine and old newspapers, threaded with the ardent sting of alcohol. It is a smoothing away of all the sharp corners that make a morning feel like a trial. There is a mother in the next room who learned long ago to open the door and whisper a request for the bottle. You hear the soft rattle of a spoon against a saucer, the muffled murmur of an apology before the landlord allows it. She comes out a few minutes later with a baby half asleep across her shoulder, its cheeks flushed and content. Her voice is hoarse with good night's mist. 3 drops, she says to herself, and smiles like it's a small miracle that exists for her only. The child blinks and drowses, soothed as if wrapped in a warm shawl. This is a side script to the morning. The domestic quick fix, the way laudanum is folded into the rituals of care. Mothers hand it in teaspoons, the same as jam or tea, trusting a chemist's mark on a brown label more than any sermon. Outside in the yard, a man who unloads crates at the dock staggers back from the alehouse, face pinched with the raw ache of a night without sleep. He steals 2 drops from the bottle tucked into his coat like contraband, and presses the glass to his lips as a thief might kiss a locket. You see his shoulders drop. For a second, his hands stop trembling with cold and exhaustion. He laughs, a small animal sound, and goes back to the dock to muscle a crate with surprising steadiness. His foreman will grumble about slack labor, but neither of them will mention the bottle at the back of the shed. It is their trade secret, the thing that keeps hands steady in a city that has seen better hours. Then there is the other side of the coin, the reminder the city keeps. Too much of this balm is its own horror. 3 doors down, a woman weeps at a window because her husband did not come home. Rumor says he was found in a straw pile at the market, breathing shallow and blue-lipped. Someone says overdose, in a voice that mouths the word like a dangerous tongue, and the rest of the house holds its breath. The coroner's man comes with his ledger and an expression that belongs in a weathered stone. People glance at their ointments and their bottles with fresh calculation. The morning's little comfort becomes, at a pinch, a thief that steals tomorrow. Even with those risks, the ritual is ordinary, almost procedural. The apothecary, too, streets over grinds his labels in the morning's lamp smoke, measuring dram after dram with a steady hand. You can watch him through the shop window. Bone-white shadowed hands that have known the same motion for years, weighing and pouring, sliding the vial into a paper-wrapped parcel. He doesn't preach. He hands you a cork and a warning in a voice that is both solicitous and bored. Mind the servants, sir. Remember to count your drops. His advice is the only kind you get. The rest you learn by living. There is a professor at the university who swears by a morning tincture before lectures. A seamstress who takes a drop to blur the edges of needle-pricked pain. An old woman whose arthritis would have felled her years before except for the softening of joints that the tincture brings. Each person has a private ledger of dosage, accumulated through rumor and necessity rather than any science. You mix into your day with the rest of them, trading discretion for relief. The line between medicine and habit is invisible until it snaps. The first effects are a pocket of warmth in your chest that migrates through your limbs like someone turning on a small heater. Movement becomes slow and deliberate in a way that could feel either pious or decadent. You tie your shoelaces, the knot sits perfect. The street outside appears softened. Carriage wheels make gentler rhythms, the cries of hawkers become a lullaby. Conversation is easier. You find yourself telling a joke that lands because it feels like an offering rather than a confession. Still, laudanum is not a panacea. It blunts, yes, but it also blurs the distinction between coping and surrender. You notice the way time loses its bite. Mornings run into afternoons without the usual scaffolding of chores and obligations. A task completed becomes a small island rather than part of a continent. The mind that performs work with ease will also forget to do the things that keep a life from unraveling. Friends joke about dependency the way people joke about the rain, practical and under their breath. You close the bottle, press the cork, and set it back on the stand with a new understanding. In this city, laudanum is an instrument and a temptation alike, a brittle bridge over the daily grind. It steadies the nerves in the manner of a locksmith easing an old bolt. It turns and the door opens, but there is always the knowledge that the lock may rust if relied upon too often. You step out into the day with your breath even, carrying the taste at the back of your tongue like a secret. The cobblestones expect you to be steady. For now, you are. You push open the apothecary's door and the bell above it tinkles like a warning. Inside, the light is thin and yellow, slanting through dusty glass jars on high shelves. The shop smells of spirits and sugar and something darker, resin and earth, the dry, sweet stink of poppy heads. A counter runs the length of the room, scuffed where elbows have rested for decades. Behind it, the chemist moves with the slow, precise motions of someone who has made measurements from memory. Scoop, weigh, pour, cap. He wears a frock coat dusted with chalk and a waistcoat whose pockets bulge with labels. You realize quickly that this is not a place hushed by squeaking wheels and polite coughs. It is a crossroads. A nursemaid clutches a bawling infant, cheeks wet with tears and sticky from molasses. She leans over the counter, voice small and urgent, and asks for something for the poor babe's teeth. The chemist doesn't look surprised. He draws a glass phial, small amber, a glass stopper heavy enough to reassure a patient, and tilts it to the light so the nursemaid can see the dark, honey-brown tincture inside. His hand is steady as he tips a dropper into her cupped palm and tells her how many drops to put on a sugar lump. She nods, fingers trembling, and tucks the bottle into her apricot shawl like contraband. A dockworker comes in next, coughing like a bellows. He smells of tar and brine and the sweet tang of the gin shop across the way. "For the chest," he mutters. The chemist pushes a blue paper wrapper across the counter, folded around a small phial of paregoric, and scribbles a rough iambic of instructions. 3 drops every 2 hours, a teaspoonful at night. The man pays with a coin that has been clumsily hammered flat at the edges and goes back out into the fog, clutching the bottle as if it were a talisman. Look at the labels. They speak Latin and candor. Tinctura opii, that neat, practical phrase substitutes for moral awkwardness. Godfrey's cordial is printed in looping script on a tin, the same cordial wagons used by mothers across the city. The chemist offers no lecture about addiction. He offers practicality. He has seen small children quieted, wives soothed through labor, poets return with eyes gleaming and pages filled with fevered imagery. He has also seen men go pale and slump behind doors. The ledger on the counter keeps no judgments, only tally marks. You run your fingers along the bottles. Some are stopperless, their glass mouth stained with sugar. Others are sealed with wax. There are tins of syrup for coughs the color of treacle and jars of opium lozenges, black and tacky. A mortar and pestle sit nearby, flecks of dark gum crusted in the bowl. The chemist grinds poppy resin with gentian and dissolves it into a measure of spirit. The alcohol masks the bitterness, but not the narcotic's pull. You can almost taste the medicine in the air. Bitter, clinging, with a glaze of sugar and the sharpness of diluted wine. A side incident unfolds near the stove. A well-dressed woman in a crepe shawl approaches, pale and guarded, and speaks in a voice like pearls on velvet. She has a prescription from a physician, an elegant scrap of paper signed in a hand that is more a flourish than a scrawl. He fills it without ceremony, a wine glass of opiate-laced tonic, a small bottle of cordial for nervous nights. A young clerk watching from the threshold whispers a rumor to his friend. Mrs. H, she uses it for her nerves. They exchange a look that is not quite scandal and not quite admiration. In this room, class dissolves into need. There is a moment you do not expect. A boy of 10 slips in, cheap hat clutched to his chest, eyes darting. He hawks his wares in a small voice, snuff, pins, stories of the river, but his fingers are greasy and there is a bruise at his temple. The chemist, without comment, hands him a penny and a small spoon and tells him to take only 3 drops for the pain. The boy stares, baffled, then runs out into the street with the spoon in his fist, already tasting the sugar on the rim. It's charity that keeps the city from collapsing into chaos here, not pity. A transaction made of practicality and habit. You watch the chemist at work. He uses a paper measure folded and torn into a cone, funnels the tincture in, and writes the patient's name in cramped ink. He keeps a book of formulations, paregorics, anodynes, troches, some recipes older than the century. One of the remedies lists oil of poppy under a hand that might have been taught by. A monk, he is precise where the world is not, but precision is relative. A teaspoonful for adults, he mutters to a gentleman buying a bottle for a coughing wife, and the gentleman nods as if to alchemy itself. The spoon is the measure. The patient is trusted to know the rest. You smell the smoke as someone lights a pipe in the corner, a rough, old habit that hangs like a halo of soot. A poet leans against the shelf, fingers stained with ink, eyes soft. He tells you about a line he lost last night to a bottle, and begs the chemist for just a draft to get the gears turning. The chemist slides a small vial across with a smile that could be classified as sympathy or as a professional indulgence. The poet takes it with the solemnity of a rite and leaves, head bowed, stepping back into the drizzle with words heavy in his pocket. There is no spectacle of law here. No constable waits to wag a finger. The sale is a fact of life. A thing bought, used, and then hidden in a drawer or inside a boot. The opiate's effects are a social lubricant. They soothe childbirth, silence riots, numb the endless grind of factory life, and push paint into canvases at 3 in the morning. They are a private indulgence, a public convenience, and a quiet menace. You cradle the bottle the chemist hands you. The glass is warm from his hand, the label smudged with glycerin. He tells you simply how many drops to take and where to store it in the dark, away from heat and children. He taps the counter in a manner that suggests he has done this 1,000 times. You can see, uncomfortably, how easy it would be to take one more dose, to drift, to wake up hours later with the city turned in color and sound as if someone else had rearranged it. Outside, the fog is thicker. Inside, the apothecary's lamp burns steady. You tuck the bottle into your coat as you leave, a small, secret warmth against your ribs. People will pass you on the way home. A woman nursing, a boy with a spoon, a poet muttering half a stanza. Each carries the same invisible commodity. The city hums, insured by tinctures and tonics, by soft drafts and sugar lumps. You are part of that hum now, appointed custodian to a small file of history and hazard. You step into a narrow shop that smells like a sick room crossed with a confectioner's window. Warm alcohol, bitter herbs, and a syrupy sweetness that clings to your tongue. The bell above the door tinkles, and a row of blue glass bottles catches the weak light, their labels spidery and ornate. Soothing syrup, promises one. Godfrey's cordial, boasts another in gilt. A tin sign advertises Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup for children, the script cheerful and murderous all at once. Behind the counter, a stooped apothecary, with glass spectacles, counts small bottles into a paper bag, his fingers stained dark with dye or drug. He doesn't look up when you enter. His work requires no surprise. The women who wait in line do not exchange idle gossip. They clutch bundles and shawls and babies with the same careful, exhausted tenderness. Time is money. Quiet is survival. One mother lifts her child to you without meaning to. The infant's cheek is raw and splotched from teething. The baby's breath is sour, streaked with the iron tang of milk gone off somewhere inside a body that is never properly rested. The woman speaks in a low, urgent voice, describing a night of ceaseless wailing, the way the crying cuts through wages, sleep, the thin seams of a household. She wants a little something to stop it. Her hands tremble as if from cold, though the room is warm. She asks for a spoonful, and the apothecary pours, the amber liquid sliding into the spoon with a sound like slow rain. You watch the syrup run like molasses, too smooth for the odor of its components. It smells of camphor and sticky sugar with a medicinal sourness under it, the chemical ghost of opium and, increasingly, morphine. Names are bandied like talismans: paregoric for the fretful infant, chlorodyne for the cough that won't quit, Mrs. Winslow's for colic and teething. They are sold in pretty bottles with flowery labels and pamphlets full of testimonials, and the pretty paper hides what the liquid will do. Side incident. A boy of 7 presses his face against the apothecary window from the street and watches the women like a hawk. He has a hawker's hope that someone will give him a coin for running an errand. The apothecary glances at him, then tosses him a scrap of paper with a job to deliver. The boy scurries away, more useful than learned, already apprenticed to the city's commerce of need. The mother takes the spoon. You see the syrup stain her thumb brown. She holds the child to her breast and the infant surrenders at once, closing eyes slick with lashes. The silence is immediate and total, like someone drawing a curtain. The mother's shoulders drop as if a load has been set down. Relief floods her face, not triumph, not even gratitude so much as a quiet businesslike acceptance. The baby sleeps. For 3 hours, perhaps 6, perhaps longer, the world will not demand anything of her. This is not care so much as contract. You can see the ledger lines behind it. The factory whistle that blows at dawn, the rent that will be due on Thursday, the elder sibling who must be sent out to work now that a parent's attention is freed. These sedatives are currency. They buy a mother's ability to wage the day. Side incident. An older woman in the corner argues softly with the apothecary about the price of a half-ounce bottle. "My girl's been swellin' with worry," she says. "She can't work with the babe screamin'." The apothecary shrugs and lowers the cost by a small coin. It's charity dressed up as commerce. The older woman nods and pays, though you can see the arithmetic of poverty in her lined face. A discount now, deeper deprivation later. You notice small things that make it real. A pamphlet pinned on the wall instructs on dosage with the surety of print, but the numbers are generous. For a child, a teaspoonful; for an infant, a half. No one measures a child like a clock. The apothecary uses a spoon. Some mothers drink from the bottle, others melt the syrup into warm milk. Measurements are approximations guided by desperation. A doctor's script is often unnecessary. A wife's nod of approval is enough. The social currency of the syrups is blunted by secrecy and etiquette. Mothers speak in tones that leave room for judgment. There are hushed confessions about the first time someone used it, a neighbor's suggestion, a midwife who seemed to know just enough, and how the crying stopped like someone flipped a switch. There is, too, a private inventory of consequences. The baby who sleeps too long, who is drowsy at play, who will later be called delicate or lazy because the body learns to prefer the sedation. Side incident. A minister enters the shop, stockings patched and collar dull, and buys a small vial for his sister's child, though he frowns as if the act is a compromise with his conscience. He mutters about ease of suffering and the need to preserve a mother's labors. It's a brief contradiction, public piety coexisting with private solutions. He pays without argument and leaves, the bell ringing like a soft absolution. The apothecary wraps the bottle, the paper crinkles against glass. He might whisper a warning, but it would be about money, not mortality. Don't give too much at once, it wastes the bottle. These remedies are marketed as gentle aids, and their packaging is careful not to frighten. They promise sleep, quiet, order. They are also plain about the relief they will purchase. A baby's cry can mean hungry lungs, teething agony, or a mother's failure to juggle endless tasks. The syrup offers an expedient reprieve. If you lean in, you can see the faces of the mothers and imagine the calculus behind their choice. There is fatigue like a second language. There are mouths to feed, wet clothes to change, a job to keep. The syrup is a machine that makes time tolerable. It is also a hinge on which future trouble may turn. A child's habit is invisible at first. A mother's reliance is quieter than a shout but no less binding. You step back into the street and the city swallows the scent of herbs and alcohol. A cart rattles by, a hawker cries a wares list. The mother with the sleeping child passes you on the pavement, her shawl tight, the baby tucked like contraband. She is lighter in step for now. You can almost hear the city's clockwork, the engines of industry synchronized by the pause of a child's breath. The syrup has done its work. The choice was not moral in the way a sermon makes it. It is mechanical, necessary, ugly, and tender, and it leaves a stick of sweetness at the back of your tongue that no one bothers to rinse away. You stand in the waiting room of a tight, soot-darkened practice, elbow to elbow with a woman whose shawl smells of boiled cabbage and another who rocks a fretful infant, its cheeks raw from constant gnawing. Light squeezes through the front window in a dusty slant, picking out the raised gilt on medicine boxes and a cracked anatomical chart of a jaw pinned to the wall. The air is thick with carbolic and the metallic tang of an open tin of chloride of lime on the shelf. A child cries somewhere down the corridor, a clear, high wail that tightens the muscles under your ribs. You hear footsteps, the doctor, boot heels tapping, soap-smooth voice already rehearsing assurance. He's younger than you expected, overcoat still dusted with coal smoke, spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He doesn't pity the child. He squats, easy and confident, like a man who has seen this particular howl dozens of times and has a remedy that will impress you. A little of this, he says, and you hear the clink of glass as he produces a small bottle. The label is elegantly printed, no patents or vulgar promises, just the name of a compound and the maker's mark. He talks like a chemist explaining an experiment. Cocaine, he says aloud as if testing the sound. He explains that it is an alkaloid distilled from coca leaves, that when applied to the gums it steals pain like a thief in the night. He uses words like local anesthetic and rapid action, and when he smiles there is a clinical light in his eyes that doesn't touch the parent's worry. You feel like an intruder eavesdropping, but the surgery is small and the words reach you. The mother nods. She's a seamstress, you can tell. Her hands are calloused, her fingers stained with ink and grease. She clutches the child with a sort of desperate tenderness. "Is it safe?" she asks, voice threaded with that old maternal plead. The doctor's answer is brisk. He mentions experiments, anecdotes from colleagues, the absence, so far, of what he calls systemic complications when used in small amounts. He says it will stop the child screaming and make the extraction easier, or in the case of a baby, ease the raw gnawing teeth. A few drops on the gum, he says, 3 or 4, no more. Repeat if necessary. You watch as the apothecary, because in this age every doctor has one hand on a chemistry set, unfolds a little paper and measures a spoonful of syrup, amber, and viscous, into which a tiny vial is plunged. The smell is sharp, a peppermint cut with astringent alcohol. He tilts the bottle and a single, trembling drop falls onto a polished silver spoon, and from the distance that spoon seems to hang forever before it reaches the child's curling lip. The kid flinches, tasting bitter sweetness, then freezes as if someone has flipped a switch. The wail collapses into a small, astonished silence. The mother exhales like she has been unknotted. You feel the oddness of your own reaction, relief that the noise stops, and unease at how easily tranquility is bought. The doctor talks about dosages, a drop, a teaspoon, a bottle for nighttime trips. He uses the same clinical tone with which men talk about leeches and cautery and the removal of a lung. The human cost is folded into procedure. It's a practical solution, he says. Children take to it well, quick results. Keeps them quiet on your shift, Mrs. Hargreaves. You look at the infant's slack face and half-smile and wonder how often that quiet will be chosen instead of patience. Two short incidents ripple through the room and rub against that moment like coins in a pocket. Nearby, a tradesman recounts in a loud, cheerful voice to anyone who will listen how he cured his toothache by stealing a pharmacist's experimental tincture and keeping it under his pillow. He slaps his thigh and cackles. The men around him cheer the tale as if it were a hunting story. It's short, proud, and dangerous. He did not go to a doctor because he prefers the gamble of his own bravado. The second is quieter. An old woman in threadbare gloves coughs and says that she gave a similar bottle to her youngest grandchild for teething, and that he slept for 18 hours straight. Her eyes are proud but hollow. Sleep, she says, is a precious commodity when you're alone with 3 mouths to feed. You hear the scratch of the doctor's pen as he writes out instructions for the mother. A few drops every few hours, never more, keep away from the light. He folds the paper into a hand-bill-sized slip and tucks it into an envelope, and you notice the practiced economy of his script. The prescription is casual, an act performed with the same nonchalance as handing change over the counter. Outside the window, a street urchin hawks his small wares. Lozenges for the nerves, sachets of something that promises cheer. You hear him call out names in the cadence of hawker voice, and you think of how the same chemist in town will portion out a draft to a gentlewoman fainting from nervousness, and to a dockworker gnarled by scurvy. The doctor's words echo in the gap between classes. Cure and commerce are the same coin here. You can taste the peppermint left in the air, bitter and medicinal. You watch the child's mouth go numb, the lips thicken in a sleepy way. The numbness marches across. The gum and under the tongue, a wave of indifferent cold. The mother kisses the baby's forehead as if to check for fever, and you notice her thumb tremble. You catch yourself counting the breaths, 1, 2, 3, half expecting some modern calamity, but the room is ordinary. Coughing, the scratch of pen, a clock clicking. A third, smaller incident folds in. A visiting midwife comes through the door with a bundle under her arm, and a story about a neighbor who swapped laudanum for the newly fashionable drops and found the change swift and cheaper. She gestures with the creased fingers and laughs too loud, as if to keep from crying. In her story there is no moral, only usefulness. It keeps the child still, that's all, she says. And when you're on a 12-hour watch, beggars can't be choosers. The doctor's voice drifts again, clinical, almost bored. He suggests taking the bottle home, keeping it locked. He warns against sharing with other children or spoiling a child into dependence. There is an almost comical confidence there, a faith in measurement that the world often fails to justify. The mother lifts the bottle, its label very small and the instructions smaller still. She tucks it into her apron like a talisman and says thank you with the economy of people who are grateful for brief mercies. As you step back into the street, the city smells of horse dung, tar, and the sharp electricity of soot. Children pivot in the gutter, something sticky on their hands. On the corner, a vendor rolls out a pasteboard with tiny vials sealed with wax. For pains, for nerves, chalked in uneven hand. A young boy licks one experimentally and grimaces, then runs off with a bright, fevered energy. You walk past with the bottle's memory in your pocket. A small, bright promise of silence, of sleep bought on the backs of chemical tongues. You can still hear the doctor's cool assurance echoing in your ears, a sound that will, in time, come to mean different things to different people. Miracle for some, crutch for others, and for a few, the first oily step off a cliff they had no name for. You stand in the dim corridor of a lodging house that smells like old paper and boiled tea, watching a procession of men prepare themselves for the week. They move with the practiced precision of people who will spend 10 hours bent over accounts and ledgers. Every gesture is economical, and slightly obscene. Their fingers brown at the nails, stained with ink, go to familiar places. A leather waistcoat pocket, a little flask, a tiny stoppered file that catches the weak morning light like a guilty eye. The bottle is never ostentatious. It's a sliver of glass no larger than a man's thumb, and it sits in brass cradles or sewn-up pockets so it will not shift when his hand reaches for it. You notice how they handle it as if it were a relic. Reverent, quick. A clerk uncorks it with a fingernail, lifts it close to his face, inhales, and for a beat his expression softens. He tips a few drops onto a teaspoon or onto a sugar cube. Sometimes he lets it fall straight onto his tongue, the wet hit disappearing beneath the molars. The taste is a peculiar marriage of metallic tang and sweetness, like the back of a bitter wine glass with a bandage wrapped around it. He blinks, straightens his collar, and turns to the mirror to flatten a stray hair. The raw, cold edge of morning nerves has smoothed into a lazy warmth that pools beneath his sternum. Outside, fog leans against the street lamps like an indecent mist. Inside, there's the constant scraping of nibs on paper, the steady clocking of boots on the stairs. You can hear the house breathe. The low rumble of a pot on the range, a kettle's impatient scream, the distant clink of a coin in a landlord's apron. The clerks move through it all like actors with a shared, unsaid cue. They dose themselves because the day will be long and unforgiving, because a ledger does not forgive a tremor, because the ledger rewards a steady hand and the tincture buys you steadiness. One man pours his dose into a cup of tea and hands it to the boy who serves breakfast. The boy takes it without looking. This is how sharp, how ordinary the transaction has become. The clerk drinks slowly, closes his eyes for a fraction of a second, and the small lines around his mouth relax. You watch as his shoulders lose the millstone they have been carrying all week. He laughs at a joke that's not quite funny and for a moment seems almost kind. The relief is almost offensive in its simplicity. A side incident: the youngest apprentice, barely 15, slips a stolen dropper from a bottle into his palm. He has watched the men do this for months, how it calibrates their steadiness, and curiosity finally gets the better of him. He tips too much. His face flushes, his limbs go plush and unwieldy. He staggers and bumps into a bucket of soapy water, splashing the ledger on the table. The senior clerk curses, then pockets his annoyance like it's another small cost of doing business. The boy's eyes droop. His sentence slurs into something like apology. Someone hands him a biscuit. He bolts it. He will get scolded. He will be forgiven. He will do it again. Across the hall, a different scene. A landlady with fingers spattered from scrubbing lifts a bottle from the shelf and measures out a few drops for a customer. She consults no book and notes no dose. She knows, by the number of coughs and the stoopness of a man's shoulders, how much will silence the tremor without laying him under the table. She slides the payment into her palm, pocket money for rent, a fee for keeping secrets. You sense that small. Economies of opiate have grown into the household accounts, no line item, no auditor, but as intimate and compulsory as the rent. A third small occurrence. A clerk in a threadbare coat hesitates on the stairs, frowning openly at the morning light. He lifts a silver-topped bottle to his mouth and takes a deep draught. His breath comes out like steam, and he smiles at no one. He's late for the train now, but he is not going to make a spectacle. He tucks the bottle back into his fob, and with the kind of composure bought by a few drops, straightens his tie and steps out into the fog as if he's been ready all along. You note the little ritual of confidence. Opiate then coat, tincture then dignity. It's a performance passed down in the household like a recipe, and everyone has a version. The physical effects settle over the room like a soft, dangerous blanket. Fingers that were jittery and precise now move with an unhurried deliberateness. The scratches of pens slacken into a smoother gliding. A cough in the corner is tamped down into a productive hum, but the calm has edges. Speak too quickly and you can hear the underlying slow pulling, an unspoken bargain. There is a fogginess to some faces, eyes a touch too glossy, cheeks flushed in a uniform way as if someone had pressed their fingertips there to cheer them. And occasionally, a man will overshoot. He will drink too deep, forget a decimal, mumble his sums, and then be sternly guided back by a manager who tolerates the habit so long as the profit remains. You notice how discreet people are, never the exuberance of an open den, never the languid, theatrical smoking of the opium dens in the papers. Here the habit is practical, pocket-sized. It is a tool, not a lifestyle. There is little moral drama in the corridor. There is no sermon. There is, instead, an economy of secrecy. Bottles are hidden in the folds of waistcoats. The men will never tell their wives because wives might call a doctor and doctors might make a statement. So they keep small, private dispensaries at hand. A pill tin under the pillow, a file behind a book, a taste on the back of a spoon before breakfast. Sometimes the remedy cuts too cleanly into the mind. A clerk who has taken his morning draft miscounts and hands the wrong papers to the ledger. A customer berates him. The clerk's composure evaporates, and a slap of shame colors his morning. Another clerk, watching, reaches into his waistcoat and offers a conciliatory pinch of sugar soaked in the same tincture. It's almost compassionate. It's almost criminal. When they file out into the street, their steps are steadier than they were when you first arrived. They fold into the city's machinery, cabs, trams, trains, with their secret pill bottles clicking quietly against their guts. You can see the effect like smoke in a mirror. The world has been smoothed out at the edges for them, sharpened exactly where they need it. The ledger will be neat, the ink will be less likely to shake. For now, their small narcotic economies have paid dividends. For now, the day is survivable. You stay behind on the landing, listening to the clack of boots fade and the ongoing household noises, clatter of plates, the faint moan of a cough from below. A faint sweetness lingers on the air where the men passed, a human perfume of commerce and chemical solace. You realize the sight you've witnessed is not merely about escape. It's about the ways a society provides makeshift remedies for its cruelty. A bottle tucked into a pocket, a few drops on the tongue, a quick smoothing of the day's edge. It's practical, it's perfunctory, and it is everything they have. You step into the back room of a publishing house-turned tavern, and the heat hits you like a hand on the small of your back. Gaslight stutters over patched wallpaper, turning ink-black puddles on the table into little pools of midnight. The air tastes of stale ale and something sweet and oily that sticks to the back of your throat, a chemist's perfume, the residue of tinctures and boiled poppy. Men and women lean over folios and manuscripts as if they were magic mirrors. Some whisper, others declaim in bursts, glass cupped in one hand, the other wrist stained with ink. Across the room, a man with a brown cane and fever-bright eyes is telling the story as if it were an achievement. He says he dreamed a palace of domes and marble. He says he saw a river running in colors no words can catch. He describes the images with fast, satisfied motions. He licks his lips, and you think of Coleridge murmuring about a castle caught in an interrupted reverie. People laugh and tip their hats. He holds his glass up like proof. You see. Without it, I would be dull as a ledger. With it, I saw the shape of things. His name isn't important to you. The claim is. Around him, a half-dozen others nod as if in confirmation, though their eyes are on the empty bottle between them. You drift nearer. A slim copy of a poet's pamphlet sits on the table, edges ragged where a hand has been going over it again and again. A young woman with coal-stitched gloves runs her thumb along a verse and mumbles the line aloud, then giggles and dips a teaspoon into a tiny file she keeps in her pocket. The liquid gleams like molten amber. She watches it catch the light as if it were the last jewel in the world. Officially medicinal, she whispers, the phrase a talisman. Officially restorative. She tips the spoon and lets it fall on her tongue. Then she returns to the page and reads, but the words move like fish in a net. And she flinches, surprised by her. Own breath, you hear a cough to your left and turn. An older man, his jaw like a stone in shadow, is writing with a hand so steady it might be carved. He speaks without looking up. De Quincey wrote it with a candor most would call imprudent, but what we have to understand is this. The visions are not the vanity of opium. They are a different set of tools. He taps his pen against his teeth. He's the kind who has read everything twice and has answers for what's proper to publish. People tilt in to catch his words as if learning a trade trick. A young reporter behind them snaps a notebook closed and mutters that cocaine sharpens his sentences. He demonstrates by reading a paragraph he claims to have penned after taking a small pinch of white powder. The words come out fast, theatrical, and a little jagged, like a musical phrase played too quickly. Someone across the room, a lean, impatient fellow who keeps one foot on the chair, says, "Anecdote, not art." And the young reporter, flush with the flush of a new thing, pushes his hat back and says, "Art is what it does to the reader. What is proof better than truth?" He punctuates the last word with a laugh that sounds like a cough. Two short things happen while you listen. A street urchin slips in, breath fogging, selling a rag of a poem he scribbled. He holds it up like a relic to be traded for a bowl of stew. A poet, half drunk and sure of his own epigrams, buys it and slaps the boy on the back with real warmth. The boy beams and scurries away. Later, someone discovers a dropped calling card, the name of a surgeon known for nerve tonics, and a quarrel over dosage starts in low, precise tones, like surgeons arguing over a scalpel. Words tumble out in the room in waves, confessions, boasts, warnings that sound like boasting. A woman whose hands are ringed and wooden tells a quieter tale. She speaks of giving her mother laudanum to swallow before bed, of how the pain eased and with it the sharp edges of grief. She doesn't brag, she frames it like a recipe. You watch the faces around her soften. There's no condemnation, only the tradecraft of survival. Her son, who sits hunched beside her, takes notes on a scrap of paper as if these practicalities might feed the next paragraph he'll sell. Someone begins to read a passage aloud. It's heavy with imagery, swollen seas, beasts, ruined cities, and for a moment the room leans collective and rapt. The reader's hand shakes slightly, and with each word the room seems to thicken. The gaslight blinks and suddenly the edges of everything feel foamy. There is a man in the corner, his scarf bunched like a throat, who laughs at the melodrama and says, "All theater." But when you glance at him, his chin wavers, and you see the living lines of sleepless nights under his eyes. You notice small rituals. A composer-like man counts out sugar into a demitasse, tipping a brown bottle until a sweet oil rings on the spoon. Another takes a tab of paper and dabs it under his tongue, a modern sacrament. A grizzled newsman leans across the map-strewn table to whisper advice. Never write under the influence unless you have a good editor. He smirks, as if the advice is a confession of his own sins. There is also a thin, clipped incident that snaps like a bone. A lanky poet stands, reciting a stanza that rises and falls with a hypnotist's cadence. Halfway through, he forgets the line, backtracks, and then, with an insolent grin, attributes the lapse to the muse's prank. He clutches his stomach and excuses himself. When he returns, he's pale and apologetic. Someone has brought him peppermint and a glass of water. He will later claim that the fallibility makes the vision authentic, that to be touched by a frenzy, and yet remember the failure is the true mark of genius. You feel in the center of all this a strange economy. Drugs are barter. They are a way to buy the edges off pain, to sharpen a night's focus, to steal a breadth of time when the day's demands would otherwise drown a thought. They're also a prop. A slur of teeth, a bottle, an opiate droplet. Each is a badge that announces membership in a club whose members value extremes over moderation. And the bragging, that's the currency, the tale you exchange to elevate a private stupor into public art. "I saw the city as if it were a map for the moon," someone says, and others nod, because who doesn't want the map? You slip out for air and the alley is cold enough to feel like truth. Cigarette embers wink in the dark. Back inside, when you return, the stories are softer now, like embers settling. A young man signs his name on a napkin, hands it to you with a look that says, "If I vanish, remember that I once saw a palace." He laughs, quick and brittle. You accept the napkin, the memory of the laugh in your throat. Later you think of the history books that will say the Victorians were prudish and proper. This room contradicts that portrait. Here, in the warm vices and quieter tragedies, you see the other side. A class of people who believed that a touch of chemical alchemy could pry open the locked door of imagination. They are brave or foolish, inspired or ruined, often both. You don't leave with an answer, only with a trembling stack of manuscripts and the faint aftertaste of something sweet and metallic on your tongue, proof that stories sometimes come on the back of an ache. You push past the sash curtains into a side street still slick with last night's rain, and the lingering coal smoke haze. The chemist's window is a mosaic of glass bottles and gilt type, a small electric of curiosity humming under the gaslight. There in neat rows are conical flasks of a dark red liquid that seems to hold sunset in its belly. A lithographed poster peels at the corner of the shop door. A smiling woman raises a goblet, and the bold type promises vigor, courage, and clear thought. A smaller seal, ludicrously earnest, shows a bearded cleric nodding approval. You laugh, but the laugh is already softer than it was on the pavement. You are curious. You have been awake for hours, and somebody has just told you that a glass will put spring in your limbs. The chemist is a man with ink-stained fingers and a smile that knows the names of every nostrum on the shelf. He tilts the bottle back. The wine pours slow and syrupy, catching the gaslight and turning the counter into a river of rubies. You notice the scent before you taste. The tart iron of red wine, the green, bitter cut of dried leaves, and something almost peppermint bright that pricks the back of your throat. It hits the inside of your nasal passages like a telegram from elsewhere, wakefulness, mailed immediate. He offers it to you in a thimble glass. It looks tiny, but the chemist's hand is steady. His label is authoritative. For the toilsome, he says, and for the intellect when it flags. You raise the glass. The first sip is a small, ridiculous ceremony. The wine slides into your mouth, tannins and sugar playing tug-of-war. Then a mild numbness blossoms along your tongue and gums, a peculiar anesthetic sheen that makes words roll a little freer. The warmth from the wine spreads across your chest, and for a beat the city feels less like a grind and more like a stage. You feel sharper. The edges of the shop seem to snap into focus. The chemist's freckles, the dust motes in the beam of gaslight, the fine threads in the poster's engraving, all of it comes alive with a precision that's almost rude. A flyer stuck to the counter brags that a doctor in London swears by it for nervous exhaustion. A newsboy at the doorway points to a medal stuck to the bottle, the one with a pontiff's visage. Apparently, even the papal approval is on the label. For a moment, you're startled by how ridiculous that chain of endorsements is, and how convincing it becomes when you can feel your footing return. Outside the window, the street is a stage of side stories. A dock worker emerges from a pub and swigs from a small flask, then hefts a battered case with the ease of a man who believes he can defy gravity. He's one of the chemist's regulars, according to the proprietor, and he'll be on the 6 a.m. steamer, he says, able to outlast men half his age. A woman with a pram pauses at the door and, with the sort of tired hospitality that is its own economy, asks if what you drank will keep her through the next round of visits from the vicar. She's got 3 children underfoot and a husband who won't sleep. The wine, she says, was a boon after the last confinement. You watch her walk off, her posture a little straighter, like a marionette whose strings someone adjusted. On the bench outside, a teetering poet, ink on his cuff, bloodshot eyes, offers you a line of bravado and a cigarette, both of which you accept because the chemist has already taken your coin and because curiosity in this city doubles as a currency. The poet talks fast. He says he composes whole stanzas in the time it takes a carriage to pass. He says he has 3 bottles tucked into his coat. He says, with a kind of bluster that smells like desperation, that the wine gives him courage to finish his work and the nerve to face his creditor. You believe him for a while. Then the infusion works its work and he grows expansive and rather loud about metaphors until a policeman frowns. The poet is not yet violent, he is merely incandescent. The effect is not uniform. A young apprentice at the counter, curious and less guarded, takes a larger gulp than you. His face goes bright, his ears ring, and he begins to pace, counting his breaths like a man learning a new gait. His hands tremble in a way that suggests the promise of the tonic carries a price. A sailor across the room swears by it. He says he once drank a whole glass before repairing a mast in a storm and lived to boast about it. Then the sailor leans too far back on his chair and the chemist catches him with a yelp. It's a little comic, this near fall. 1 minute, Hercules, the next, utterly human and unbalancing. There is a darker alley if you look for it. The newspaper pinned beside the register features a brief item about a minister in Brussels who, on too generous a diet of such concoctions, wandered into a church belfry and began shouting at the bells. The chemist shrugs. He has seen men puff into mania, men who thought themselves Achilles and ended in a gutter. Medicine, he says, is a sharp tool. Fools and saints both touch it. His hands are the sort that have learned to balance convenience with caution, but the caution is still a courtesy rather than a rule. This wine is more than a drink. It is a social accelerant. It lubricates conversation in salons and scaffolds endurance on the docks. It is poured into coffers of celebrity endorsements, into the palm of mothers and the hands of the exhausted. You feel the change in your steps. Lighter, quicker, almost eager to be seen. Ideas that seemed heavy this morning resolve into bite-sized notions. The city seems to offer itself up like an open ledger, waiting for you to write across it. You finish the glass. The chemist refills the thimble for a price, and you think briefly of refusing. You think of sleep, of moderation. Then you think of the poet upstairs, of the dock worker lifting a crate, of the lady with the pram walking off with steadier shoulders. You accept another sip because the world as it is seems unfairly flat, and the wine promises to level the hill. As you stand to leave, the chemist wraps a small bottle for you, tucks it into tissue, and slides it across with the casual solemnity of a man who knows the world runs on little excuses. The bottle's label glints in the gaslight. A pastoral engraving, a testimonial in long type, the signature of a manufacturer who sells more than a liquid, he sells reassurance. You step back onto the street, the city smelling of coal and wet cobblestone, your chest lit by an odd, new energy. You feel like a man who has been given a map with clearer lines drawn, as if the fog around your thoughts has been lifted to reveal options. The night widens, and with every step, the wine's warmth pulses under your ribs like a second heartbeat. You tell yourself you'll use it sparingly. You tell yourself that a miracle is just a bottle away. You walk into the crowd feeling the peculiar confidence of someone who knows a little secret everyone else accepts as a commonplace. You are shoulder to shoulder in a trolley of heat and perfume, the gaslight hissing above like a distant insect. Satin rustles, steel-boned corsets creak, and the air is a thick cocktail of orange flower water, dust, and coal smoke. A woman collapses ahead of you, not dramatically but with that practiced, delicate limp, fingers fluttering, lashes lowering, as if exhaustion has conspired with fashion to vault her into a garden of fainting spells. Hands go for little metal cases and glass files with the same automatic reverent servants reserved for keys. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Sharp, like a stable's cleaner and barroom liquor at once. It slaps your sinuses awake. Someone presses a small corked phial under her lover's nose, his eyes pop. She inhales and straightens, cheeks blooming back into color. The bottle is so small it could be a snuff box. It clinks against her bracelets like a secret. These are smelling salts, sal volatile, hartshorn, spirit of ammonia, the era's portable CPR. But in the pockets and reticules of the truly fashionable, they are not pure ammonia alone. They are doctored, gilded, fetishized. You watch a footman unroll a leather roll and display a dozen ampules, each labeled in a cramped, elegant script. Restorative number 2 with coca. Another tin promises camphor and ethereal lift. The vendor's eyes flicker bright with profit. For a sovereign, he will tailor the scent to your lady's constitution. When a woman breathes these altered salts, it is not merely revival. The ammonia wakes the lungs. Whatever else is in the vial stabs the mind. A tincture of coca stings at the back of the throat like peppermint burning. Camphor rolls into the sinuses like a cool pebble. A dash of high-proof spirit warms the chest like a rude, friendly flame. The world snaps sharper. Conversations that had been dull and polite suddenly shred into laughter or confession. Your limbs feel lighter, your heartbeat skitters. There is a chemical insistence to it. Stand taller, flirt harder, keep your balance on heels that know only collapse. It's as much social lubricant as medicine. Anecdote flits through the crowd like gossip. Lady Moncrief, down at the Langham, has a vinaigrette lined with coca, so subtle her rivals accuse her of vivifying the entire ballroom. She tucks it behind a fan and fans until a whole table is in stitches. People say she never actually faints anymore. She merely stages respiratory crises to be revived, an artful feint followed by an encore smile. Side incident: a theater usher, thin as a fingernail and perpetually tired, has a patch of skin on his wrist slick with vapor from a broken vial. He swears it keeps the cough at bay during the third act. A small, brandy-faced woman in the fourth row offers him her vinaigrette when the lead actress collapses mid-aria, and for a few minutes he walks taller, chest puffed, as if the stage itself had been anointed. Then the cough returns, louder, and he laughs as if he's told a joke. Side incident: on a morning in a carriage entrance of a church, a laundress shrugs off judgment from a passing dowager and offers the woman a scrap of camphor-soaked cotton for the fumes of the street. The dowager snaps it away, presses it to her own nose, and then winks at the laundress as if some inner secret has been shared. The exchange is a brief leveling. Both women are revived, both sent into the world again, shoulders squared against the fog. There is a dark choreography to these little rescues. The smelling salts are both weapon and balm. A rival might tuck a vial laced with a stronger stimulant into a lady's glove to sharpen her tongue into scandal. An ambitious young man might carry a sachet of ethereal lift into the smoking room, handing it around like a badge of modernity. You hear whispers that certain apothecaries will concoct bespoke salts. A hint of coca with a whisper of ether for the poet who needs to be roused but not sedated. A poet will buy it, of course. He will claim the salts sharpen metaphors. He will later moan about an empty purse. The physical sensation is almost comedic if you did not know the cost. 1 minute a lady's lips are a pale rose. The next, her eyes gleam, her breath snaps, and she insists she could walk a mile, dance a quadrille, or deliver a scandalous epigram. The smell goes to your eyes. Tears spring, but they are the sensible kind, not grief but chemical testimony. Voices around you change in cadence. A newly revived woman speaks as if she has just been given permission to be brilliant and rude all at once. Men leaned in, suddenly alert, tell better stories. The room becomes a menace of charm. It is not all glamour. The stimulants scratch at reason like a moth trapped in a lantern. Women who use these salts daily begin to need them in the morning, the way some need tea. A seamstress who favors the strongest concoction complains to her sister that, when she skips it, she cannot swallow the noise of the street. A child, left too long in the care of liveried attendants, sneaks a whiff from a dropped vinaigrette and spends the afternoon buzzing like a trapped fly, wild and giggling, then dying into a lethargy that looks frighteningly like a nap no parent would design. There is also an economy that smells faintly of desperation and of enterprise. Pharmacists paste up advertisements proclaiming instant revival in curly-cued letters. Buttons with miniature vials are fashionable. Men pin them to waistcoats, women to cravats. But there is also a secret lineup outside some shops where the disgraced and the opportunistic trade in stronger batches. A woman desperate to keep up in a society that equates vitality with virtue corners a pharmacist and leaves lighter in purse but brighter in manner. Night watchmen come by in the morning shaking their heads at the bright-eyed ladies staggering through fog, muttering about the price of amusements. You learn to watch for the little telltale signs. A quick hand to the throat, a tiny glass glinting from a glove, an exaggerated inhalation that makes a laugh cut. The salts have become a punctuation in speech. A pause for breath, a punctuation of sensation before sentiment. They are a form of punctuation in society itself, marking the places where performance and reality blur. By the time you leave the carriage, the night feels rewired. A clock that ticks quicker, a world edged in a keener light. The smell lingers on your sleeve, an afterimage of revival. You are less inclined to pity the fainting fit or the contrived swoon. You think instead of the small electric commerce of life. How an inhalation can be both a salvation and a pact. How a glass phial can contain the smile of a room, the brightened eyes of power, and the quietly widening hunger that follows. You step into a drawing room lit by gaslight and the pale blue smoke of expensive cigars. Velvet curtains pool at the window. A piano sits open, its keys dusted from last night's recital. The room smells of bergamot and warm metal, the tinny tang of a surgeon's case opened on the sideboard. The conversation is meant to be about horses, charitable committees, the latest scandal. Instead, the talk circles around a small, gleaming object that everyone now carries like a calling card, a hypodermic syringe. The first time you see one close, you think of a tiny pen, all brass and glass, its needle gleaming like a sliver of moonlight. A physician in a black frock coat offers you a demonstration, his gloved hand steady, the instrument cradled as if it were a mechanical jewel. He speaks of precision, of science conquering pain, words that soothe the mind as much as the liquid he's about to deliver soothes the body. He fills the barrel with a clear, viscous solution, expels a bead of air with a practiced flick, and reveals the needle. There is a soft metallic click, the sound a promise of modernity. Your host's face lights up with that faint, privileged hunger you recognize, the hunger for anything new that can be framed as refinement. When the needle slides beneath the skin, the sensation surprises you. It is not like the theatrical fall into stupor you might imagine. It is a small, sharp sting, an entry like a needle pulling thread through silk. Then warmth spreads along the vein, an oddly domestic warmth, like a hearth beginning to glow under your ribs. A hush falls over the assembled guests. Someone at the window laughs too loud and then apologizes, eyes glassy. You feel the room tilt, edges softening, voices sliding into a pleasant indistinction. The effect is immediate and intimate. The remedy performs as theater and as comfort. Part of the allure and the danger is how modern it looks. There is a leather case for the syringe, lined with velvet, the instrument's brass polished to match the hostess's hairpins. Servants are trained to present the kit with the circumspect reverence of those who carry sacred things. The needle becomes a status symbol, a technical marvel that says, I have access to the latest science, and I can afford to have my nerves tidied up by a man with initials stitched into his gloves. Short incident. At one salon, a visiting surgeon demonstrates his technique by giving a small dose to an older dowager who has complained of nervousness for years. She reclines theatrically, fans herself, and then sighs, not out of relief but in a kind of astonishment. The hue returns to her cheeks, her hands stop trembling, and she pronounces the injection a triumph. Someone at the back whispers that she has never been seen so composed during a committee meeting. The whisper spreads like a perfume sample through the room. Another mini-scene plays out in a corner where a young man, a baronet's nephew, if looks mean anything, brandishes his own compact syringe the way other young men brandish pistols. He calls it an indispensable for long car rides, for bad weather, for melancholic poetry. He pops the needle into his finger with a showman's flourish, no physician in sight. The action is half bravado, half experiment. He grins as warmth floods him, then slumps against a chaise, and the women around him murmur sympathetically while remarking on what a delicate color he has become. To them, the syringe is a toy as much as a tonic. The instrument has a quiet, persuasive rhetoric, clean lines, scientific language, explanations about nerve endings and the reduction of pain signals. That rhetoric blunts anxiety. Gentlefolk love things that make their discomfort legible and fixable. So the syringe, in its elegant case, begins to supplant older remedies at the sideboard. A gentleman nurse, once employed only for convalescence, now appears at private gatherings carrying a tin of vials like an apothecary's dowager. Physicians make house calls with the air of men delivering not only medicine, but a kind of social imprimatur. You are introduced to terms like subcutaneous and rapid absorption, the way you might be introduced to a new kind of sugar. Yet the transition contains small, embarrassing ruptures. Someone drops a vial in a dark hallway. It shatters with a sound like small ice. In the commotion, a footman steps in bare to the cold stones to sweep up the glass, his palms nicked and his face white with fright. He apologizes for the delay in bringing the carriages, and a lady pats his hand as if to soothe him, then returns to her seat to discuss the relative merits of different physicians. The class lines remain, even as the drug crosses them. Another side incident. An old military man sits in the corner, sleeve rolled, displaying faded puncture marks for anyone who asks. He speaks of campaigns and long nights in field hospitals. He says the substance saved his life more than once when bullets and fever did not. There is a certain grim pride in his voice and a flicker of warning in his eyes. He says that among those who served, many came to rely on it simply to cope with the daytime world after nights of horrors. No one calls it by a shameful name in that room. Instead, they exchange looks and change the subject to horses. There is dark humor in the way the syringe becomes a fashionable affectation. You watch a woman arrange a tiny adornment, a blue ribbon perhaps, on the leather case that holds the instrument. It matches her gown. Fashion plates begin to include a discreet pocket for medical implements. Midwives at the edge of these circles begin to whisper about how well the method works for troubled labor. Quick relief, less tearing. A sort of clinical efficiency that promises to conceal pain from polite conversation forever. But there is an undercurrent you cannot ignore. The very thing that announces scientific progress also makes dependence discreet and cumulative. Where once infirmity displayed itself in public, in bandages, in crutches, now it hides behind silk and manners. People drop out of dinner parties with a quick excuse and return luminous, unexplained. A woman claims she sleeps like a baby. A man attributes his bright spirits to better air and more exercise. You see the needle marks on wrists and think of them as secret embroidery. You leave the salon with a fluted glass of something cooling in your hand and the memory of that warm wash. A peculiar kindness that the injection gives, as if it were a short-term pardon for the world. The next morning, when you notice a slight craving for the calm it offered, you tell yourself that it was only an experiment. Everyone's trying new things. In town, the instrument appears in shops alongside razors and smelling salts, and the language of assistance and relief turns into a market. The wealthy men and women who first embraced the syringe praise it as sanity in a busy era. They have no idea, yet, how readily what fixes the nerves can come to demand them back. You climb the crooked stairs 2 at a time, because your back tells you it has been bent that way for 10 years, and it would be rude to argue. The stairwell smells of wet wool and coal dust. Everything that moves in and out of the harbor leaves a little of itself behind. Your palms are raw where the rope has bitten you all day. Black lines etch the creases. When you push open the thin door to the den, the room hits you like a slow, warm wave. Oil lamp glow, stale tobacco, a faint sweetness that crawls right under your tongue. The den is a single, low-ceilinged cell that tries its best to be private and fails. A cracked window looks out over the cobbled alley where goods are rolled in and out all night. In the glass, the street lamp's reflection ripples with the movement of a barge. The furniture is embarrassed to be seen together. A splintered chair, a lumpy mattress in the corner, a table scarred with knife marks and no shame. On the table sits your pipe case, open like a small coffin. Inside lie the tools you trust more than your foreman, your pipe, packed with a little brass bowl at one end and a long wooden stem, a tin of matches scraped into ragged edges, and a soft lump of opium wrapped in oilcloth, dark as molasses and just as viscous. You laugh, a short sound that tastes like old tobacco, because everyone's a philosopher after a day of hauling casks, and you can always pretend you're better than the cargo. The lamp you set on the table sputters. Its flame shivers when the draft from the alley presses at the pane. You warm the opium by a small iron poker over the lamp, coaxing the resin until it softens. When you tease a small curl off the lump with your knife, it smells like burnt sugar and a cemetery. The sweetness of boiled syrup with a bitter edge that sits at the back of the throat. You press it into the bowl. The metal takes it like a mouth taking a secret. Outside, someone is cursing, crates dropped wrong, a cartwheel bitten by a nail. A gull harpoons the sky and sounds offended all the way down. These are the minor details of the harbor that keep your nights honest. A scrap of newspaper flutters under the door. A boy's face appears for half a second like a stage prop, and then he's gone, shouting his headlines up and down the street until the words wear thin. You entertain the notion of buying the boy off with a penny to tell you a made-up tale, but instead you light the lamp, torch the opium, and wait for the vapor. Heating the opium is a ceremony. The tip of the lamp makes a small, steady blue. You hold the bowl over the heat until the resin softens and begins to smoke softly. A thin, perfumed mist rises, carrying sugar and garden flowers half-grown in a fog. You bring the stem to your lips. On the first inhalation, there's a shock. Your ribs remember the rope, your knuckles whisper of splinters. Then the signal fades. The sound of the alley becomes distant. The cough in the next room, sharp and human, drifts in like a ship's horn. You don't need big words for this. Opium says goodbye to ache. A man named Joss, who lives across the landing, pushes his head through his door to ask if you've a light for his pipe. He coughs like a bell being rung wrong. You slide the lamp toward him, and his fingers close on it with grateful shame. He thumbs the edge of the tin where your name is carved, a joke you never bothered to correct, and talks of a job tomorrow moving sugar from number 3 shed. There's a note of fear in his voice. There is always a note of fear, and you tell him he'll be all right. You tell him anything to keep him steady. The opium works by the time his shadow has slipped back. It doesn't make music sudden or dreams sudden. It's more like someone has loosened the laces across your chest. Your hands stop counting the hours that were carved into them. You think of no wage and everyone you didn't get, which is always the same thought and always profitable. In this loosened world, memories fold like paper boats. Your father's boots that smelled of the same tar. Your sister selling lace until the rain took threads from her hair. The night you tried to keep a mate from falling into the river by shouting until your throat bled. Those stories rise and sit in the room like other men. A woman from upstairs thumps on the ceiling as if to say it's too late for singing. Her slapping sends a dust flake avalanche from the beam, and you watch them float into the lamplight like invitation cards. Sometimes, after a few more draws, you get philosophical. Tonight you think about the ships that bring opium into the country, the boxes stamped with names you cannot read, the men who count coin back in London offices and do not have your hands. You think of the dry goods and the tea that come on the same routes. The thought is almost funny until it isn't. On your third pipeful, the room becomes an amphitheater for small, absurd things. A cat slips in, attracted by the smell of anything fatty. It leaps toward the table for a scrap of bacon you happen to save for breakfast. You snatch it away and pat the animal behind the ears with a tenderness that surprises you. The cat purrs like a small engine. The lamp tips only a little when you stretch to reach for the matches, and your heart skittles. The kerosene threatens to spill, flame to lick the oilcloth that wraps the remaining opium. For a second, the room becomes very, very fast as you knock the lamp level with a curse and a laugh, saving everything but your dignity. This is how close you live to disaster. A foot in a barrel, a match dropped, a quarrel in the yard. You will not be the man who goes quietly. The beauty of it, if beauty can be counted in this place, is the forgetting. When the vapor coats your lungs, the ache becomes someone else's problem. You lie back on the mattress and watch spots of light detail themselves into faces that could be saints, or could be the ledger clerk who never tipped his hat. The edges of things soften. The seams of the world are easier to slip through. There's a small, terrible generosity to the drug, an offer to forget how hard you worked, how little you earned, how many times you watched a ship's flag and felt nothing at all. Outside, a bell clacks for 1 in the morning. Somewhere a drunk will be coaxed home by a constable with a voice like gravel. Inside your den, opium and lamp and the precarious order of small lives keep the night moving until you decide you've had enough. You sit up and the room threatens to wobble as if it has had one too many shillings. You stub the pipe and wrap your lump of opium in the oilcloth. The cat curls against your boot like a small, warm secret. Tomorrow you will rise and shoulder a net and a coil of rope. You will count the same boxes and dream the same thin dreams in broad daylight. For now, beneath the lamp, the harbor sighs around you, the work, the wind, the smell of salt, and you stay, an island of heat and smoke, until the light is spent and the city pulls its blankets a little tighter. The opium makes the ache manageable. The den makes the world tolerable for a little while longer. You duck under a gilt sign and step into a room that hums with a kind of polite savagery. Steam fogs the panes, and the air tastes of boiled sugar and something medicinal that slips through the bergamot like an unwelcome whisper. Ladies in heavy skirts fan themselves with practiced boredom. A few gentlemen, collars limp from the carriage ride, lean close to the fireplace, not really warming themselves, warming their ears. You choose a corner where the chairs are patched but the teacups are pristine. The porcelain clinks with a crisp, rehearsed sound, 2 teaspoons tapping the rim in a Morse code of complaint. Old gossip lives there, like soot in the chimney, and it bites as much as the cold. Someone at the next table, a woman whose hair is still a triumph of pins, whose wrists are flecked with the faint stains of past remedies, lifts her cup and lets the steam curl about her nose like a flag. They do it at Grosvenor, she says, a statement more than a whisper. Her companion gasps in the inversed fashion of people who have practiced shock all their lives. You imagine oil paintings nodding along behind their eyes. You listen. They speak in the low, decisive cadence of women who have learned that scandal must be parceled out slowly. Laudanum, the first says, is poured into evening tea when a hostess has a truth she doesn't want aired, when a husband is too vocal at dinner, when a young attaché is too fond of his own opinion. It is not malicious most of the time, she insists. It is a household convenience as handy as candlesticks, a tincture to smooth jagged edges, a small sop to keep the peace. A waiter passes by, an earnest boy with ink on his cuffs, and you catch his expression. He knows the rumors. He used to work in a row of townhouses where the Duchess kept a glass stopper on her sideboard, and a rule that any guest who overtaxed conversation was offered something to help them relax. The boy shrugs into his apron as if the shrug contains everything. The absurdity, the danger, the gilded indifference. You see the scene in your mind and then in the real thing. A married woman in a faded purple dress recounts how, last season, a sister-in-law committed a small treachery. At supper, the sister-in-law tipped a teaspoon of laudanum into the claret toast. The toast swallowed a senator into a mild oblivion long enough for the hostess to whisper the name of a scandalous lover into the ear of a visiting viscount. And the viscount, suitably emboldened, declared it publicly at chess the next day. The scandal broke, reputations fluttered, and someone got a new carriage. The lady laughs at the end, the laughter is brittle. In this town, mischief often looks like maintenance. You watch the hands around you. Fingertips opal with rings, knuckles powdered with the evidence of yesterday's applications. These women speak not so much of poison as of an instrument, a remedy for nerves, or for noise, or for indiscreet tongues. Hysteria drifts through sentences like a named but uninvited guest. The word is a kind of passport. You can wear it and be forgiven for trembling. Side incident 1. A nanny at the next table, her apron worn thin, a child's hat placed on her lap, leans forward to confirm a detail. She tells in quick, efficient words of the baby's evening tea. The child cried and cried at dusk, and the anxious mother poured 2 drops of laudanum into the saucer, let them dissolve, and placed the saucer against the infant's lips. The child slept for 12 hours and woke with a smile as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The nanny shrugs. It is better, she says, than sleeplessness for both of them. You can feel the heat of the infant's cheek against the nanny's hand, an image small and terrible at once. The room's laughter shudders. No one says addiction. The language isn't yet there, but you feel the old, precise economy of dependency settling into the corners. Side incident 2. A man in a heavy coat, not quite a gentleman, not quite a servant, interjects with a story about a valet who fell into the hazardous business of selling the family's stock. He began by siphoning a few spoonfuls for a toothache here and a languor there. Then he sold vials to low companions for a night's coin. One night his conscience, or perhaps his God, sat heavy on his chest, and he fled with the key to the sideboard. The sideboard was reported open the next morning, the family bewildered, and a brand new calfskin shoe was found outside the coach house. The man in the coat snorts. He says that evening when the parson called, the valet confessed that he had always admired the lady's gloves more than the laudanum. It is funny until you picture the parson's face, and then it is not. There is an odd rhythm to all of this gossip. It moves from the practical to the grotesque, from courtesy to cruelty, and back to curiosity. Conversations knock against each other like spoons in a basin. A woman remembers the time her aunt, old and theatrical, used laudanum to make a statement. At a small dinner, she tipped a reasoned measure into the cup of a pompous cousin who never missed an opportunity to correct her. He dozed through his grand lecture on duty. The aunt announced, to polite applause, that she had finally enjoyed an uninterrupted afternoon of embroidery. The cousin never suspected. He wrote years later to thank her for the wonderful rest. You notice how often the language softens around responsibility. It's a drop, help her relax, for the nerves, which are verbal gauze. You are struck by the domesticity of it. Laudanum is not just a chemical in a vial. It is a household utensil, placed between the salt cellar and the second course, as ordinary as a napkin. This ordinariness makes the horror manageable, makes it allowable. While you sit there, another table erupts in the way only those who know each other's secrets can. A young woman, cheeks bright with scandal and claret, tells the assembly about a luncheon where a gentleman, notoriously blunt, was stealthily persuaded not to go to the whip club that evening. A well-placed teaspoon in his teacup ensured his cardigan stayed on and his opinions stayed put. No one calls it villainy. Context provides latitude. You become aware of your own fingers curling around the handle of your cup. The porcelain warms your palm and the tea breathes bitter and brave. There is a perfume of dissolved precaution, aniseed, lemon peel, the faint climb of spirits against the bergamot. You imagine, with a sudden clarity, the thin tremor that so many of these tales seem designed to staunch. A method for surviving the long Victorian day when social survival often demands the sacrifice of the self. As you stand to go, the gossip reels on like a well-oiled bell. The stories are small acts reframed as measures of control, to quiet, to dull, to protect reputations, to nudge a sleep into place. You step back into the street, the city damp and full of brighter, harsher odors, and you carry the taste of it with you, faint, medicinal, oddly consoling. The idea of a teaspoon at the ready seems less monstrous than inevitable. You imagine the city as a teapot, its spout pointing in a dozen directions, pouring comfort and compromise into the same delicate cup. You push through a narrow door that smells like a pharmacy. Sharp alcohol, medicinal camphor, the sweet, tarry undernote of dissolved opium. The bell above the door tinkles on its rusty hinge, and the shop's gaslight flickers, as if surprised by a customer who has stepped out of time. Glass jars huddle on shelves from floor to ceiling, each one wearing a painted label in a hand that promises efficacy and hides a secret. Compound tincture, elixir of bark, Brown's chlorodyne, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, each name sings in neat copperplate, a hymn to relief and a lullaby to danger. You move down the narrow aisle between tall cabinets. Your hand brushes a bank of drawers whose brass knobs are worn to a soft shine. Behind them, the chemist keeps powders like a miser keeps coins. A mortar and pestle sits on the counter, pitted from years of grinding seeds, bark, and resin into obedient dust. The chemist himself, a man in a waistcoat with a pocket watch and ink-smudged fingers, looks up from a leather-bound ledger. He nods without inflection, the way a man who dispenses other people's misfortunes must. "Something for the cough, sir," he asks, though his eyes keep calculating. "Who you are, how you look, whether you can pay." His scales on the counter are a cathedral of brass, each pan a possibility. He plucks a paper-wrapped bundle from beneath the counter, a small bottle of brown liquid, and sets it before you with the same casual finality as a surgeon handing over an instrument. You get close enough to read the faint print on the label, Tinctura opii composita. The letters are smudged, but the price is not. The smell that rises is sweet and metallic, like old coins dipped in rum. He talks as he lays out directions. A teaspoon for a strong man, less for a woman, a drop for a child. The teaspoon is a measure of trust, of ignorance. No glass syringe, no measured milligrams. A turn of the wrist can slip you into sleep or into something harder to wake from. A mother at the counter interrupts the calm like a flaring candle. Her baby screeches from within a shawl. She clutches a penny so tightly the coin looks tender. "Godfrey's cordial," she says, voice thin with sleep. She wants to know how much for the babe. The chemist draws the tiniest phial from a drawer and without dramatics pours a ribbon of dark syrup into a spoon. The woman tips the infant's head back, and the child latches like a drowning thing at a lifeline. You watch the infant's face relax into a sleep that looks like the absence of struggle. The chemist pockets the penny and returns to his ledger, expression blank as if nothing has happened at all. In the corner, a sailor argues in low tones about withdrawal. He is weathered and feels too much. His knuckles are white where he holds a folded hat. He wants something to stop the shakes. The chemist sighs, then reaches for another bottle, morphine in crystal form, wrapped in paper like contraband. He explains how to mix it into water for a draft. The sailor's gratitude is immediate and raw, an animal thing. He tastes it behind the counter and swallows the first relief as if it's a stolen sunrise. When he leaves, his shoulders are no longer drawn up like a ship's rigging. Above all else, the place is loud in small ways. The clink of glass, the soft slap of paper as the chemist raps, the scratch of quill on ledger. There is a woman in black at the far end who asks for nerve tonic. Her voice is shaped like a question mark. She is well dressed. Hat pins glitter like tiny daggers. The chemist doesn't ask why, but he slides a bottle across to her that promises calm on its label, printed in extravagant type with a list of ingredients no one else can pronounce. She drops it into her reticule, and with a tight little laugh. At the absurdity of hiding, a remedy meant to hide you departs. You can't help but notice the advertisements pasted near the window. They're loud and unapologetic. Guaranteed to restore vigor, boasts one, over an engraving of a man who looks healthier than any real person you've seen that morning. Another promises a cure for the hysteric woman with an image of a smiling, serene lady who could not possibly have been alive. The shop is a theater of confidence. The labels are the stage props. Bold type stands where caution should be. The chemist obliges your curiosity and shows you what compound truly means. He lifts a bottle of spirits, measures out a generous slug, and drops in an opium cake the color of dried peat. The resin dissolves slowly, like night sinking into water. He grinds a bit of coca leaf into a powder and adds it to a vial of wine, a tincture that promises alertness without the qualms of coffee. He offers you a taste, though he calls it a sample. It warms the back of your throat and loosens something in your chest, a sort of small, sharp optimism. You can understand why men bring cartloads of grief and leave with only a bottle. A small, nasty incident interrupts the steady commerce. A newsman bursts in, breathless, paper clutched in his fist and eyes wild. He wants a remedy for his eyes, something to stop the red from the long nights reading proofs and drinking until the light goes out. He wants it quick. The chemist pours a few drops of a clear solution into the newsman's palm. The man's face becomes a little less raw. He stumbles back into the sun clutching his paper, an extra headline tucked beneath his arm like a talisman. Outside, the street is a smear of rain and horse droppings. Inside, the counter is smeared in a different kind of residue. Sticky fingerprints run along the wood where mothers and sailors and journalists have left their marks. A handkerchief abandoned on a shelf smells faintly of chloroform and peppermint. A ledger with columns of names reveals familiar patterns, the same names returning week after week for the same cures. You can tell by the handwriting who is prosperous and who is desperate. The chemist talks of recipes like a priest recites doctrine. A pinch of this, a dram of that. He keeps a cupboard of patent bottles, flashy labels, secret formulas marketed as miraculous, beside plain phials of single-ingredient tinctures. The patent bottles are loud, Their colors are bright enough to glow in the dim light. The plain files look almost ashamed of their honesty. You leave with a paper-wrapped parcel. The chemist tells you, as he tells everyone, to take as required and to watch the dose. You hear the warning and already know it will be last on your list of remembered things. Outside, the rain tastes faintly of the city, and the bottle feels warm in your pocket, a small, dark promise against the world. For an hour you will be better. For a day perhaps nothing will go wrong. For longer, who can tell? The chemist returns to his ledger, to the next customer, to the next small hand offering a penny for a bottle that will both salve and betray. You walk away thinking about how ordinary the danger is here, how the remedies are bright as flowers and heavy as coins, and how everyone who comes through that door leaves both lighter and a little more frail. You push open the door of the apothecary and a wave of sharp spirit and old paper hits you like a damp blanket. Shelves lean under amber bottles, their labels printed in neat, unhelpful script. Tinct. Oh, elixir. Vin, morphia. A half-dozen names for liquid that will either ease your pain or steal your breath, depending on who ladles it. The apothecary measures with a metal spoon, flipping it by eye, then laughs and offers it to you with a shrug. 3 drops'll do, he says, as if 3 might mean anything from a safe nudge to a fatal plunge. There is no standard. There is only taste and habit and the confidence of someone who has watched other people's grief walk out of his shop with a stamped receipt and a smile. You bring the spoon to your mouth. The laudanum is oily, black-tinted like old tea, and it coats your tongue with a sweet chemical bitterness that makes you cough. It smells of brandy and raw poppy. Your vision softens at the edges, like looking through fogged glass. In the corner, a chalkboard lists remedies for nerves and female hysterics. Both cures, it seems, are available in unlimited measure. A landlady's bell tinkles, and you step upstairs to the boarding house. The corridor is a gallery of past and present maladies. A man pacing with hands clutched at his diaphragm, a seamstress rubbing her jaw, a poet asleep with blotches of ink across his face. You can tell who visits the chemist often. There are stains, tiny dark moons on cuffs where a spoon was dragged across fabric, and the smell of bittersweet tincture clinging to collars like a secret. You watch the landlady, Mrs. Finch, fuss over Mr. Toller, who insists his gout is unbearable. She consults a small green bottle, tips a spoon, and gives him a measure. He swallows, brows loosen. Then his breath finds a jagged rhythm. Mrs. Finch's face folds into worry for the first time. She presses a cool rag to his forehead. His fingers go slack. Side incident. You sprint to fetch the doctor, but by the time his horse scrabbles through the muck, it is too late. At the inquest, the body is described as having suddenly expired. The coroner speaks of heart failure, and the jury nods, satisfied. The bottle Mrs. Finch kept behind the tea chest, the one with half a dozen different inked notations stuck on it, does not help. No one thinks to ask how many measures she has given Mr. Toller over the months. Down in the tavern, another scene unfolds. A coachman, dry-eyed and hoarse from night shifts on the docks, is offered a glass of wine rumored to have tonic properties. Vin euphorique, mixed liberally with coca. He drinks to keep his eyelids from sealing, to keep his hands steady on the reins. The stimulant burns like lightning through his veins, a quick, sharp brightness. He laughs louder than anyone else. His skin flushes, his pupils needle away from being the soft pinpricks of opium addicts. He dances on the edge of mania. Side incident. 2 hours later, you find him in an alley, jaws clamped, foaming at the mouth. Patrons circle and say, drunk obviously, while a sympathetic constable mutters about excess excitement. The attending surgeon declares a sudden attack and writes his note in a cramped script. The wine bottle sits discarded by a drain, its label half peeled, unreadable for the identity of its maker. No one traces how many spoonfuls of an extract of cocaine were poured. Back on the street, a child's wail pierces the evening like a small, human siren. An aunt, hands red and raw from washing linens, boils water and takes down a boxed remedy she believes to be a helper for sleepless babes. The label promises quiet and contentment, the same promises plastered on dozens of tin cans and cheerful adverts in papers. She gives the child a dropperful, and the infant's cry softens into a sigh that settles into stillness. The aunt blinks, smoke curling from the hearth, and decides it was the right choice, until the scream that never returns. Side incident. At the inquest, a physician in a stiff collar explains to the jury about nervous temperament and constitutional weakness. The drug bottle is a prop in the coroner's examination, passed from hand to hand like a cursed coin. A supplement in the newspaper the next day calls the event a mysterious and melancholy occurrence. No one mentions that the manufacturer printed no concentration, no warning, and happily advertised that comfortable sleep may be obtained for all the family. There is a common language of euphemism in this world. Taken too much becomes sudden seizure. Hard habit becomes improper indulgence. Died from the effects is shortened to apoplexy or congestion of the brain. Certificates are written with feathered pens that prefer neat platitudes to messy truths. A coroner's grove chair, a drooping jury, a sympathetic headline. These are the ritual acknowledgments of a death that might very well have been prevented by a simple labeling standard or a scale that told a truth. You begin to notice the bodily signs in your neighbors. The slow bowing of a back from constipation, the way a man's hands lose their quickness and stay folded, the insomnia that makes a woman pace until her skirts are threadbare, the ravenous appetite of another that turns into nothing. At all, the stimulants produce an edged brightness, a tinsel euphoria that leaves the body trembling when it departs. Opiates pull a curtain over the world, warm and numbing, until breathing is an optional chore. Some complain of nightmares, others of pins and needles running under their skin. A few speak of a constant thirst you cannot quench with tea or gin. You realize the threat is not always the dramatic collapse, it's the small, cumulative miscount. It is the mixture when two remedies are taken without thinking. Take this for your cough, said the doctor, and this for your nerves, said the neighbor. Both come with alcohol, both with a narcotics gift. It is the casual disposal of a syringe on a mantle, the bargain bottle from a street vendor, the fiddly word elixir, hiding the fact that whatever's inside could change from batch to batch. Regulation exists on paper in the city, but in practice it's like a fence with missing rails. Dealers, chemists, and well-meaning friends all trade in confidence and habit rather than milligram and measurement. People learn by taste and tradition. They learn by watching someone else sleep too long or wake up with eyes full of a new light. They learn to call it the Constitution or a passing fit instead of naming the chemical that has crept into their blood. You stand in the doorway and feel the thin line between ease and harm like a breeze. You can smell it in the damp plaster, hear it in the hush of the sleeping rooms. In this city, dosage is not a number but a gamble. Overdose is not an exception. It's an occupational hazard. And the only thing more common than the drinks and bottles and remedies on the shelves is the polite, bewildered way people explain away the missing breath of a neighbor. You tuck your hand into your coat and note, with a kind of grim amusement, that even the best intentions here are measured by the teaspoon, and teaspoons are notoriously unreliable witnesses. You close the door on a sky the color of old pewter, and immediately the room replies with the smell of other people's evenings. Cheap spirits, the iron tang of tobacco, a faint underodor of boiled cabbage that has seeped into the floorboards. You sit on the edge of a narrow bed and let your palms settle on your knees. Your hands still remember the work, ledger ink under your nails, the ache behind your ears from the factory whistle, but your head has already started to move away from the facts of the day. If your hand goes instinctively to the little file on the bedside table, you already know which ending you're buying tonight. A teaspoon of dark, honeyed tincture, and every hard line softens. The tincture blooms on your tongue, earth, smoke, a cloying sweetness that slides down your throat on a river of burning alcohol. Heat coasts down your ribs, a warm, polite hand that will not pry. Your vision thins, edges of the room rounding as if someone is erasing the corners with a smudged thumb. The wood grain of the wardrobe becomes a map of gentle ridges. Voices from the hallway are too far away, laughter muffled. The bed takes you in without complaint. The world shrinks to the pulse at your temple, and a pleasant, oily contentment that feels, absurdly, like grace. 2 rooms over, a woman is administering a baby its soothing drops. You imagine syrup sliding into a tiny mouth and think of generations who have treated pain like a task to be managed. The baby sighs and sleeps. Downstairs, a gruff housekeeper mixes brandy into tea for an old man whose hands are like knotted rope. The steam fogs the window. The old man's breath comes easier. These are small rituals, legal as prayer. But tonight you might choose a different salvation. You take a glass instead. A cheat of coca-laced wine, red and smelling of tobacco and oranges, pools in the bowl. The first sip is almost perfumed. Wine citrus, something sharp that snaps like a tack on the inside of your cheek. Warmth blooms differently now. The weariness you wore like an ill-fitting coat peels off by degrees. Your chest feels high and open. Your step, if you were to stand, would likely be light. You find yourself talking quicker in your head, a chain of observations that refuses to be quiet. The restlessness is a thin wire of electricity under your skin. Your fingers drumming the bedspread suddenly make music. The streetlights outside seem to glare with new clarity, each rain-splattered halo a comet. You could walk a mile to the docks and think it no trouble. A poet on the landing downstairs slams a book shut and laughs. He thinks he has had an idea so brilliant it will make him famous. He hasn't. He also hasn't slept in 3 days and will declare in the morning that the insight came from genius, not wine. You grin inwardly because that absurdity is how the city keeps itself amused. Then there are mixtures that make your body and mind fight each other. You might find a dram of bitter, crystalline powder in a folded paper, a stimulant, a nerve steel. You pinch it between finger and thumb and taste a metallic bite. The room tilts into a jittery clarity. Your heart begins to stutter in a new rhythm. Time seems accelerated. The clock on the mantel becomes obsessive, each tick an affront you swat at. You stand and pace. The lamplight flashes across your teeth. Your jaw clenches until your cheek aches. Small, meaningless tasks become urgent projects. You write a letter in a flurry, then throw it away and begin again. Your hands shake so much that the ink runs. You laugh, not because you mean to, but because your body insists on an emotion to match its speed. Outside, someone hails a cab with a whistle too loud. A constable staggers past, cheeks flushed, tripping over the curbstone. A pill he took to steady his nerves has instead punched holes in his balance. You catch the sight from the window and think about the thin line between steadiness and collapse. It is a line walked by many tonight. If you're in luck or folly, your evening is an orchestrated chaos. A drop of tincture for the edge, a swallow of wine for the heart, a sniff for the mind's appliances. The pharmacist knows your face, nods with professional cordiality, and measures nothing more than his memory and your complaints. You could, by degrees, trade precision for habit. The teaspoon becomes a ritual rather than a measurement. There is confidence in that casualness. Confidence is cheap when everything is legal and labeled medicine. But the aftertaste carries a ledger of its own. If you've balanced your choices poorly, the morning will find you in a peculiar limbo. Groggily alive, mouth like old paper, your tongue feeling too big for the world. You will wake to the sensation of having someone press cotton into your ears. Thoughts arrive as if through water. The day will gape at you, and you will not have the energy to respond. You curse the lack of precision, the polite smile of the chemist who sold you a cure with hardly a question. A neighbor will ask about your cough, will get no answer, will go downstairs and return with a slop of tea and a knowing look. Or perhaps the stimulant has overreached. You wake with your heart a small, furious bird in your chest. The room seems painted with urgency. You begin to fix things, the loose board, the letter you never sent, the lamp you have not cleaned in months. Hours later, your hands will tremble from the work you don't remember doing. Your appetite will shut like a door. Your mouth tastes like penny scrap metal. The afternoon is a blur of small triumphs and deep fatigue. Sometimes the cocktail gives you something approaching grace. You wake with a slow, grateful ease like dawn itself has been softened. The world is bearable. You can walk to the market without hating it. The lines on your face look less like accusation and more like a map you might someday read. You think, briefly and with a kind of shame-free vanity, that the elixir has made you better. You pull on your coat and walk out into a city that seems to have paused its endless demands for a single, considerate breath. But there are always those little disruptions that remind you of the gamble. A child runs by and pulls at your sleeve, hair matted, face bright with scraped knees. A vendor offers you a sample of a new cordial that will restore vigor. An elderly woman in the stairwell clutches a brown paper bag like a rosary, her knuckles white with a habit you understand but will not name aloud. Each person is a variant on the same experiment, which mixture will let them get through another day. When the night closes in fully, whatever you chose will claim its price. The tapestry of sensations, warmth, sharpness, dreadless ease, and the small, surgical loneliness that comes with narcotics settles into you like a new, ill-fitting garment. You breathe and the fibers shift. Outside, the city keeps its long, imperfect watch. Lamps guttering, horses stamping, laughter hedged with sorrow. You are part of the same uncatalogued economy, money exchanged, relief procured, sleep purchased. The bed receives you differently depending on the cocktail you've mixed. It is either a soft promise or a thin sheet you hide under while your own skin trembles. And tomorrow, if tomorrow comes, you'll learn which of last night's comforts was an ally and which was a thief. For now, you let the sensations roll through and out, like tide pulling shells toward a new shore. You sit back on the sagging edge of the boarding room bed and let the day settle like ash on your sleeves. The room tilts gently. The city's chimneys keep breathing their slow, constant smoke. A cart rattles on cobblestones below, and the steady coughs in the hallway measure out the hours. You taste something bitter at the back of your throat, laudanum again, or the afterglow of the pipe you shared with the poet, and you try to name what this day has been without blinking it out with another dose. Morning came with the smell of tar and stale bread, and the thin cheer of a clerk knocking his pocket watch to life. You had a teaspoon of something to steady your hands so you could button your coat. You told yourself it was medicinal. You walked past the gin shop and up the stairs. You nodded to a woman carrying a baby whose mama had been prescribed opiates for a fever. At the chemist's, a friendly man with stained fingers sold you a wine fortified for vigor, cocaine-laced. He called it because why face the docks without a little edge? A doctor had scribbled a note for laudanum that morning after you described the headache as gnawing. The poet down the landing offered you a pipe. You admired his feverish handwriting, which the morphine had made both prophetic and illegible. You spend the day moving through the town like someone shifting between moods. Caffeinated rage over punctuation in a dingy writing room after the cocaine wine. A velvet drowse over lunch that laudanum gave you. A golden, pining haze in the evening after a short, reverent opium dream. You feel clever. You feel connected. You feel numb. You feel the little frisson of risk, that private joke with mortality that comes when dosages are measured by a teaspoonful, and a mother's certainty rather than a calibrated syringe. You watch a duchess. Hand a bottle to a maid and the maid's fingers tremble. You listen as an old physician assures an anxious husband that a drench will settle his wife's nerves, his voice soft because he, too, has seen sleeplessness. You watch the poet scribble, and you wonder whether the words would have come without the morphine, whether genius and addiction are not friends but uncomfortable roommates. Myth and reality sit together in that room like two old men who both smoke and both insist on telling the same story. The myth says Victorians were delicate and moral and draped in propriety, teacups forever poised, fans fluttering, a society that blushed at sin. The reality presses forward with stained fingertips. Medicine cabinets stocked with powerful opiates and stimulants, pharmacists who double as social workers, and an entire culture where a dose is a domestic ritual as common as a cuppa. The myth insists drugs were the vice of the desperate. The reality shows you dockworkers whose hands ache and who find sleep only after a dram. Mothers who feed laudanum to colicky babies because it works faster than lullabies. writers who count on cocaine to meet impossible deadlines, the wealthy who medicate their ennui with substances prescribed by reputable practitioners. You learn that legality in this century is not the same as compassion. These substances are legal, commonplace, and touted as cures, a miraculous relief that ends suffering in a bottle. But the scale is off. The dosage is guesswork, the chemistry is crude, and the consequences are private tragedies bleeding into public life. You see addiction wearing respectable clothes, the well-dressed man whose afternoon tea is an opiate tonic, the lady whose nerves mean she cannot speak without a sedative. You see the thin line between use and dependence, 1 teaspoon too many, 1 extra glass on an exhausted night, and you understand how easily a culture can normalize self-medication until the self disappears. Yet it is not all darkness. In small corners, you meet practical people trying to make sense of suffering with the best tools they have. The doctor who prescribes laudanum intends to relieve pain. The mother who gives her child a tincture hopes for sleep. The sailor who takes opium seeks the brief grace of a night when his muscles stop throbbing. There is a kind of brutal logic in the way these remedies are distributed. Immediate, inexpensive, often effective. But logic is not enough to temper the human cost. The poet writes lines that hurt and hum. They seem to know the price but keep buying more of the language that costs them their clarity. As dusk comes, you replay the day in small flashes. The smell of the chemist's shop, the clatter of the gin shop sign, the writer's luminous yet shaky sentences, the mother proffering a bottle to a wailing infant, and the way the city's soot turns street lamps into halos. Each scene refracts the central truth that this era was less an age of prim manners and more an enormous laboratory where pain, grief, exhaustion, and the search for profit met unregulated chemistry. You realize the laughter of the boarding house, which at first sounded like camaraderie, is also a thin facade for suffering. The poet's fevered wink now tastes less romantic and more tragic. You step out onto the landing for a moment and inhale the bitter air. You have lived this day in someone else's habits, and you carry those habits back to your present as an ache in your palm. You are grateful for small, domestic luxuries you did not always notice. Standardized pills, clear labeling, measured syringes, and doctors who now must answer to bodies of law and medical standards. You are grateful for the vocabulary that did not exist in 1872, words like addiction and recovery and harm reduction. Because naming something is the first step to understanding, and understanding is the first step to change. Being here gives you a crooked sort of appreciation for modern inconveniences. You think about the pharmacist who now cannot, by law, hand out a bottle of morphine like a tonic, about the regulatory forms that feel tedious and bureaucratic, but also keep people alive. You think about public health campaigns, about support groups, about pain clinics and methadone programs, ugly words in some ears, but lifelines in others. This gratitude is not triumphalist. You do not pretend modern medicine and modern policy are flawless. They are complicated, often messy, sometimes cruel, but they exist in a conversation we had to start. We learn to measure, to research, to legislate, to pity, and to care. As night deepens, you let the boarding house's chorus recede. The poet's cough becomes a metronome for regret. A muffled laugh drifts from the tea room. Someone is betting on stocks they can no longer see straight. You fold your hands in your lap, thinking of the small, private economies of solace that kept a whole nation moving despite the cruelty of industrial life. You think of mothers, men with raw knuckles, and women whose nerves cost them their days. You think of a society folded into itself by convenience and neglect, and you feel a slow, bitter compassion. You do not romanticize what you have watched. The glamour in the writer's fever is not worth the cost. The poet's luminous lines are not an apology for the morphine, but neither do you reduce everything to melodrama. You have seen rescue and ruin in the same afternoon. A tincture that quiets a baby's scream and a bottle that quiets a soul into absence. That duality sits in your chest as a complicated ache. Before you close your eyes, you place an empty teaspoon on the bedside table like a tiny relic. It is the shape of choices, of measures taken and measures missed. In this quiet, you are aware of both progress and debt. You are grateful for regulations and compassion that evolved later, for the vocabulary and institutions that help people today who would have been lost in 1872. You are also mindful of how quickly a culture can normalize danger when it offers immediate relief. You turn the lamp down until the flame is a small rebellion against the dark. Outside, a factory whistle blows its single mournful note and the city exhales. You breathe in the present, the sterile certainty of labels, the dull, bureaucratic comfort of prescriptions that are tracked, the slow, hard work of acknowledging harm and helping each other. You cannot undo the day you lived through, but you can carry its lessons. That ease without measure is dangerous. That compassion without limits is not the same as treatment, and that naming pain matters. As sleep takes you, or the artificial hush of exhaustion, which in this century could be the same thing, you let the last image be the boarding house stair, empty now, leading down into the night where everything that happened today will wait to be remembered. You think of the poet and the clerk and the mother and the duchess, each moving through their small, necessary deceptions. You are glad you woke up in your own time, with its imperfect, frayed, but honest attempts to know and to help. You close your eyes and, for once, are grateful for the quiet certainty that tomorrow's medicine will come with a label, a dose, and someone who knows the words to name the danger.